Welcome to Good God, conversations that matter about faith and public life. I am your host, George Mason, and I'm delighted to welcome to the program today Rachel Lazar. Rachel is the president and CEO of Americans United for Separation of Church and State. Rachel, we're so glad to have you on the program.
It's great to be here with you. Thanks.
Well, I should actually tell the audience that this is partly a run-up to an event that we're going to be having in Dallas at North Haven United Methodist Church on Monday night, June the 17th. And that event will give shape to our conversation today, in fact. And one of the key things that you are dealing with at Americans United and leading in, and that has to do with the restrictive abortion laws that we are finding in numerous states, including in Texas, and how that actually, instead of simply reinforcing people's religious convictions, as many people believe is the case, violates other people's religious convictions at the same time. So talk to us about that, because I think for many in our society, people don't hear that. They don't understand that that's true.
That's really true. I think an older generation really got it because I think when the older generation was living in America, they were aware of the way certain religions and in leadership were trying to influence abortion in this country as a way of asserting their own religion and
Mhm.
imposing it on everyone. And I think then it was the concern that way was around the Catholic Church sort of
Right.
imposing one religious view on everyone. So we have members of Americans United for Separation of Church and State who are in their 90s, men,
Wow.
men who I've asked, what draws you to Americans United? And they say, the abortion issue, which I've always found fascinating
Right.
because they understand it to be an issue of religious freedom.
Mhm.
But to sort of spell it out, um, the reason that abortion rights is a religious freedom issue is because everyone should be able to make their own decisions about their own bodies, lives, and futures according to their own religious beliefs.
Mhm.
And different religions have different belief systems when it comes to abortion and sort of and women in general.
Right.
And so, as a Jewish woman, which is relevant because the film that we're going to be showing at this event that you just um, advertised is a film about Jewish resistance to abortion bans. I'm a Jewish woman, so I feel comfortable speaking in that space. And as a Jewish woman, I can say that halachically, according to the holy books of my religion, that I would be not just allowed, but obligated to have an abortion if a pregnancy threatened my health or life. And so it is a direct violation of my religious beliefs to
Mhm.
ban abortion,
Right.
in my case.
Mhm.
And this is true of many people from many different religious denominations. I actually have up on my other screen something that I wanted to point out. My friend Robbie Jones runs a group called PRRI that does great research in the space of religion and politics and policy and culture. And he wrote recently about a study that they did, and I quoted this on Twitter. If you were going to accurately finish the following sentence, most people of faith in America believe abortion should be. The final words would be mostly legal.
Mhm.
And isn't that fascinating? And I think that's because there are so many different religious denominations that actually believe in abortion rights in most cases. And
Mhm.
of course, there's a piece that, there's a study and a piece that Robbie did that really lays this out. I have it open right now. And, it's quite remarkable how throughout so many different denominations, this is true. This was reflected in the case that Americans United brought in Missouri.
Mhm.
Also challenging their abortion ban because we brought it on behalf of 14 clergy from 7 different religious denominations. And the
Mhm.
religious denominations were mostly Christian. You know, there was United Church of Christ and United Methodist. They're Episcopal. We actually rolled it out in the beautiful Episcopal church, Christ Church Cathedral, gorgeous in St. Louis. But then we also had an Orthodox Jewish woman plaintiff.
Mhm.
She's called a Maharat. It's a term that many of us aren't familiar with, including many Jews,
Mhm.
but a sort of leading official
Mhm.
in in Orthodox Judaism. We also had a couple of Unitarian Universalists and some sort of non-denominational and Reform rabbis. I think that also shows, George, how uh, so many different religious beliefs have a stake in this fight against against the abortion ban that we're seeing pop up across the country.
So I think you're making an important point because um, often what's claimed is that uh, policies like these that are put into law are a result of something that has commonly been called Judeo-Christian uh, ethics, right? That has formed this country. Of course, that seems to be somehow a broad brushed gesture toward including Jews with historic Christian hegemony in this country. But what you're pointing out is that, first of all, Jews haven't really given their consent to being part of that, and we really are different, and we have different interpretations of things, and that's true among Christians as well. And the fact is that we also have a country where agnostics and atheists have a stake in this matter of religious separation of church and state, and that they are no less citizens of this country because they lack a particular faith commitment than those who have one. So we really haven't, in a way, Rachel, I think, risen to the constitutional ideals of religious pluralism, have we? I mean, part of what's going on here is that we are still fighting for, it seems, or some groups are, a privileged religious voice in the country when both the Constitution and the Bill of Rights prevent such a thing from being a reality. They protect the rights of the minority religions and no religion. So much of what's going on here is about democracy itself, about how we make decisions and pass laws, right? And what role religion has to play in it. So the work of AU is really important in this fight, not just over abortion, but the larger question. Huh?
I think you put that perfectly. I think this is a battle over democracy and specifically a battle over whether America is going to be a diverse and pluralistic nation that makes good on its promise of equality, which of course is a fundamental of American democracy, or whether it's going to be a conservative Christian nation and no longer be a democracy. I mean, America wouldn't be America
Right.
without that, right? And I think Christian nationalism is an effort to embed privilege for European Christians and frankly conservative Christians
Mhm.
into our laws and policies.
Right.
And the kryptonite to
Mhm.
that is church state separation
Mhm.
because it prevents Christian nationalists from doing that. It stops conservative Christianity from imposing itself into our law, into our democratic secular law. So I think you're exactly right. This is really nothing less than a fight for democracy. But George, also, you know, as the leader of this group, when I came here over 6 years ago, I noticed that we did talk in sort of platitudes and abstraction all the time, which is important and it attracts a lot of our members. I mean, democracy and our our Constitution and our First Amendment and our founding fathers and all these things, right? Very important. Doesn't always touch sort of a new generation in the same way. And what I found is the human connection to the issue, the fact that, what we're talking about isn't just some abstraction, right? It's about whether you're going to have access to health care in this
Right.
country, or whether there can be a rule that says that, abortion bans trump the EMTALA requirement of doctors to treat you if your life is at risk, or whether or not you can get a job with a federal contractor. Federal contractors employ 1/5 of the nation.
Mm-hmm.
But under the Trump administration, in the name of, quote, religious freedom, they tried to have a religious litmus test available for federal contractors to impose when you apply for that work. So it's about your health care, your livelihood, right? Your ability to access social services
Right.
if you're vulnerable. I mean, that there were all of these rules that the Trump administration passed in the name of religious freedom that said taxpayer funded foster care agencies can turn away parents that don't pass a religious litmus test, or we're going to remove the religious freedom requirements from social services so that you're no longer notified that you don't have to say a prayer in
Right.
order to get access to food when you're hungry, or a bed when
Mm-hmm.
you're homeless. So, I mean, I think also, yes, very much democracy, and also just bringing it home to our daily lives.
Right. So, you mentioned this sort of new interpretation of religious freedom. It reminds me of the parable that Soren Kierkegaard, the the Danish existentialist philosopher and preacher, told in his day, when he said that a grocer woke up one morning and went to his grocery store and found that someone had switched all the labels on the cans on the shelves so that you didn't know what was what inside anymore. And it feels to me somewhat like that on the matter of religious freedom.
Oh, yes.
We have something that is rooted in protecting minority conscience, something that is uh, part of the history of our country, in saying that we will not be a majoritarian religious nation, and it's now being used to enforce majority religious views. Although I would argue that's not actually true, as you say with Robbie Jones's piece. But the assumption is that there is one position that can be encoded into law. And so, Rachel, I guess what I would ask you at this point, of people who are listening, much of the argument that people make, maybe on the other side of this, is that groups like Americans United and Faith Commons and other organizations that are arguing for religious pluralism and for a true separation of church and state are the end goal is a loss of moral life encoded in our law. And I guess I always want to say, have we lost confidence in our religious communities and families' ability to shape the moral ethos of our country? And we now have said that we're going to turn to government, when we have actually always been skeptical from the beginning of government's role in being able to do that. What do you say to people who say you're just trying to take God and morality out of our country?
I say absolutely not. I say Americans United for Separation of Church and State was founded by religious folk.
Mm-hmm.
76 years ago, we were founded by a group of Methodist pastors, the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, Seventh-day Adventists,
Right.
seminary deans, and that even today, every day, we bring religious Americans and leaders together with the non-religious to fight for everyone's right to believe as they choose, so long as they don't harm others. So there's nothing that could be farther from the truth. In fact, many have argued that it's our church state separation commitment that allows religion to flourish in
Mhm.
America, because as Roger Williams wrote long
Yay.
ago,
I'm a Baptist. Yeah,
there
Roger
you go.
Williams.
There
Thank
you
you.
go. And of course, he founded Rhode Island as the first state colony with religious freedom in the country. And he said, forced worship stinks in God's nostrils.
Mhm.
So truly devout people, and I've heard about the Sermon on, read about, heard about, I'm not Christian, but the Sermon on the Mount and praying ostentatiously. I mean, truly devout religious folk, Christians and non-Christians that work with us,
Mhm.
are very, very committed to church state separation as a way to preserve the sanctity of religion and to keep it from sullying by our government. In fact, think of Dr. Martin Luther King, too, right? Who talked about the importance of the church being the conscience of the state. And the church can't be the conscience of the state if the state is a religious state, right? The two are mixed.
And we also are not just doing it for the sake of the flourishing of our religious communities, but also because rooted in all of our religious traditions is an obligation to love our neighbor as ourselves. And that neighbor may be a person of other faith or no faith. And being able to show that we are defending their right to be different from us is part of our religious obligation and our religious community.
I
So,
mean, for sure. I remember when I was working for the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism,
mhm,
and we sort of noted that according to the Talmud, I think it was Rabbi Eliezer the Great who said that the Torah warns 36 times, and I think some people say 46 times, not to oppress the stranger,
mhm,
right? But once or something, not to oppress your neighbor. And so the idea is it's harder not to oppress the stranger
right,
because they're different from you. So we
right,
all have this very natural human kind of instinctive way of treating the stranger as lesser,
right.
person we know, who's in our family, or but the thing is, the American experiment will fail if we can't find a way to be mutually respectful and coexist with
Right.
people who are different from us, because we are an experiment that has intentionally
Mhm.
invited in the stranger. I mean,
Right.
that's what our country is based on. And if you also think about, just looking for the quote so I don't blow it because I love it. Yeah, Thomas Jefferson, who, sorry, I have to go there just for a moment, who is the architect really of the First Amendment, along with James Madison,
Right.
wrote the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom,
Mm.
which is the sort of underlier, right? And when he described that in his autobiography, and you got to realize, right, this was like he wrote this in something like 1802 or 17. I think it was in the early 1800s that he actually wrote this. He said that the purpose of the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom was to protect, and I'm quoting, the Jew and the Gentile, the Christian and Mohammedan, the Hindu and the infidel of every denomination.
Mhm, mhm.
Think about how radical that was for that time period. But you know what? Church state separation is an American original.
Right.
These guys got some things very wrong, but
Mhm.
they got church state separation very right as the invitation for America to be a country of pluralism and
Right.
diversity. They
Right.
really did. And it was so intentional. You can see in that statement, so
Mhm.
intentional.
So let's go back to focus on the matter of reproductive freedom now, or abortion rights, if you will, depending on what language you want to use, because that's going to be the focus of our conversation here in June.
Yeah.
And uh, I think it's important to say that this matter of people's religious convictions about things like when life begins and who should decide and all of that. We are not actually telling people that they have to stop using their religion to reason about this debate, right? But what are we saying, Rachel, to people of faith about how we make laws regarding reproductive rights and care in this country? Because we're having to adjudicate this in a democratic setting. So when people who say, but my religion wants to say that that conception is the moment when life begins, it is a human life at the moment of conception, that violates Jewish law, it violates Muslim law, it violates the conscience of many other Christians, but some Christians especially have that view. So how do we adjudicate this? Where do we go? Because now the Supreme Court has said, have it out in the states, right? And here in Texas, we have a virtual ban on abortion. I mean, the chances of you getting an abortion in Texas are almost nil. And what's more, you may be criminally charged if you even abet someone trying to leave the state to get an abortion.
You know, first, George, let me just say something that it's just so obvious, but it has to be said.
Mm-hmm.
Abortion bans are so sexist because it takes two to tango.
Mm-hmm.
It takes two to create a pregnancy.
Right.
But it's only, and it's, of course, there are some gender non-binary and trans, but I'll just talk about sort of the majority of pregnancies are people who identify as women. And, you know, only the woman is the one whose body is growing this sort of developing life, right? And I also want to say, you know, in Roe v. Wade, Justice Blackmun acknowledged that it's developing life. It's fine to acknowledge that and to still say it's fine for a certain amount of time in pregnancy for women to be the ones, the pregnant people to be the ones to make their own decisions about their own bodies. Because, you know, the thing about pregnancy is there's this developing life, but it's embedded within this other human being, right? And the other human being is typically a woman, right? And her life, her health, her future, right? All these things, her mental health, all these things, right, are wrapped up in that pregnancy. And we all know that stuff happens, right? This is not all irresponsible, or certainly not all irresponsibility from women. Right? Those are sort of living sort of memes and tropes about that are sexist. And so what we're really talking about is, you know, interfering with the health and life of so many women through these abortion bans. And, you know, I think that's why what we're seeing across the country is a backlash. You know, we are seeing these ballot initiatives. We're so proud that in Missouri, where we brought this abortion lawsuit, and I think we really have, and it's still alive in the court. And I really wanted to talk about it in the Under God documentary that we'll show in June, but I couldn't because we hadn't filed it yet. So that's the only frustration of my role in the film, that we were amidst filing it and I couldn't say a word. I was a good girl. But I think, you know, what happened is we filed that lawsuit and it led to, in part, this ballot initiative there now too, even in Missouri.
And every time it goes to a ballot, if you can get to a ballot, and we can't, by the way, in Texas, because we don't have that privilege. We can't have statewide referenda. So it's fascinating. But whenever we see that, abortion becomes legal again in a state, right?
Right. And I think that Texans should not lose hope. You know, sort of Texans who believe in religious and reproductive true freedom are actually still part of a majority, part of a majority in this country. And right now, you're right, it's not even necessarily the majority who is holding the power reins. It's sort of the powerful, powerful, but the people have a lot of power. And I think a lot of the necessary ingredient, the like, excuse me, this doesn't work for everyone, but the Tinkerbell magical dust is people not losing hope. in the
Yes.
power of their voices,
Right.
and not forgetting about the importance of coming together across our differences. And that's what Americans United for Separation of Church and State, AU.org, for those who want to join us and donate, that's what we're doing every day. We're knitting together this diverse community of all of the different types of religious groups, Christians,
Right.
religious minorities, the non-religious,
Right.
public school advocates, because Christian nationalists are attacking public schools and trying to
Mm,
either conservative Christianize them, and we can talk about what's going on in Texas,
mm.
or divert funds to private religious schools.
Right. Right.
Reproductive rights advocates, LGBTQ advocates, people who just care about the right to read the books that
Hmm.
you want to read and make sure that our libraries aren't banning and burning them. I mean,
Right.
this issue knits together so many different communities. And if we bring those communities together,
Hmm.
George, and we reach out, even if we have some differences in other ways, whatever they are, great. That's the power of the coalition that we can put together to
Right.
regain reproductive and religious freedom, even in Texas.
But Rachel, how do we motivate moderate people? And, moderate is a word that sounds lukewarm, frankly. I mean, uh, you put together a campaign called "Come Let Us Reason Together,"
And
which was intended to bring people like this together. When you were, I guess, directing the culture program at Third Way, and so this is a call from Isaiah, right? Come, let us reason across our differences and find a way forward. It feels like we are in a zero-sum contest right now. It's all winners and losers. Who gets to win, and there has to be a loser. Um, I'm remembering during the civil rights era, Dr. King said that the goal was not victory.
mhm.
It was justice and reconciliation. And so, what does that look like in this case, Rachel? How do we motivate people of moderate, liberal, progressive instincts to be passionate around justice and reconciliation, and uh, and 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 assure that people on the other side do not think that if our position prevails, so to speak, that they are summarily dismissed from our society, that they have no place. How do we mobilize people to be passionate about that and assure people on the other side that there's room for all of us at the end of this struggle?
So for one, thank you for the confidence in me for even asking me such a question. I appreciate it. It is the question, I think. And I mean, I definitely have thoughts on it.
Yeah.
But I think we are in a moment where I myself find that I'm in the minority in the
Mhm.
progressive community for often, not always, for kind of wanting to find shared values and, kind of sit down and talk together. I recently was invited to speak at the Federalist Society on a
Wow.
panel they had on 30 years of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And I absolutely enthusiastically accepted their invitation. And I went and I spoke from my heart,
Mhm.
and I said, look, I mean, I think you all would agree, right, that the Piggy Park case was right and that religious freedom shouldn't be used as a workaround civil rights laws to be able to discriminate against Black people. Do I hear an amen here? Okay. So, but why can't we agree that religious freedom shouldn't be used to harm any of us? What about our LGBTQ brothers and sisters?
Mhm.
Why? And it was especially touching for me to say that because a lesbian member of our staff was in the room. She's doing our social media, and I was so aware of her, the
Mhm.
whole time. But I mean, I think that a couple things. Number one, I think we need to be able to sit down together as human beings and to make ourselves vulnerable and be authentic. I just spoke about this. I just did the baccalaureate address at Lehigh University on
Oh, great,
Saturday, which
great.
was a huge honor. And I actually spoke about come let us reason together and doing this
Ah,
actually. So I'm actually going to publish it in our Church and State magazine
Good.
for the July-August edition. So you'll be able to read the whole thing then. But the Lehigh has an article up on their website about it now, if you want to look. It
Good.
quotes the speech. But I think if we can sit down as our authentic selves with people who are from, quote, the other side, right? And so we don't have to hold our nose or give up being who we are, but
Right.
we sit down authentically, but we're letting go of stereotypes and our
Yeah.
defenses are down.
Mm-hmm.
And we're there because we want to see what we realize there are real differences, but we also are hopeful that there is vast space in front of us where we can find shared territory and shared ground.
Right.
I think you got to pick the right people for those conversations, but I think those conversations are incredibly valuable. That's what we did with Come Let Us Reason Together. So that's one thought, and the other thought is, I truly believe that an issue like church-state separation should be a great place for common ground. I mean, this is not like back in the 1980s, Americans United for Separation of Church and State was majority Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not anymore, but
Right.
we really should be. We are bipartisan. It is not, it's not every day, but it's not unusual for me to speak to a member who's Republican. And I really appreciate that we have bipartisan membership that is so important, for our cause. And I feel like, this should be as American as apple pie and vanilla ice cream.
Right.
I'm hopeful that our issue can do some work in bringing people together. It's just more challenging today where religious extremists are operating so much in the culture war space that it makes it just so partisan, and it's really, it transcends partisanship. So I think there's also some hope there.
We call our organization Faith Commons for the very reason you have just suggested, that there should be space, a commons to which people can come and bring their faith with them or no faith and participate fully in those kinds of conversations. Rachel, thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for leading Americans United, for being a voice of reason and faith, and promoting full participation in our democratic society. We look forward to having you here in Dallas in June, again, June 17th at North Haven United Methodist Church. You can look on social media to find the AU and Faith Commons promotion of all of this. Thanks again for being on Good God, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Great to talk to you, and I can't wait.
Thanks so much.